Okay, if the members would go ahead and move to the front here, we want to go ahead and try to get the meeting rolling here this morning as quickly as we can, and we were waiting for a quorum, and I believe we've got 9 members in the room at this point, but let's give it a shot. I think we're getting close. Clerk, call the roll.
The roll is open, sir.
All right.
Clear the vote.
Okay, clear the vote, and we'll wait on one more member.
Governor's budget, police bill. So I'm preparing out my notes for this, and I'm gonna listen to it, but I'm not gonna break that up into 2 hour things.
They're all, they just take care of it. Oh, that's awesome. I like yours better.
Hey, Wagner, I got a check this morning from McPike. Harry Blevins died.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did. He did yesterday afternoon.
Oh, it's so easy to take it now, instead of taking it out. I love
All right. Clerk, we're going to try it again. Clerk, call the roll. Open the roll. Cast your votes. Okay, close the roll. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We've apologized to everyone. We've got a busy time this morning because we want to have a detailed briefing on our budget, but we have a number of House bills that we want to clear first, so appreciate everyone's patience. We have several bills that are similar or identical to Senate bills, and for the most, there are three that we're going to roll into a block, but there's one that I would like to take up individually, House Bill 183, Delegate Ayala. And the reason for that is when we have a new member that has a bill that we can pass, we want to be able to introduce ourselves to you and you introduce yourselves to us.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we'll say the pleasantries. Good morning. How are you all? And 183 is my pride and joy, as you can tell, which deals with data breaches. And I'm not sure how much more information that you need, but as you might remember, the General Assembly passed legislation requiring companies to report data breaches of employee payroll data. It was estimated that this would save $800,000 for the Commonwealth in unrecoverable fraudulent returns. The Department of Taxation suggests that we add tax preparers to those lists, which is expected to save the Commonwealth $300,000 annually. So we're proud to keep saving and keep thriving, and hopefully you will show me the love here by giving me your vote and passing me through.
Well, thank you, Delegate. I think you're special. You represent some of my family in Prince William County, so
That's great.
We're singling you
Wonderful.
out. What's the pleasure of the committee?
Move the report.
Motion properly supported to report the bill that is House Bill 183. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Clerk, open the roll.
Roll is open, sir.
Cast your votes. Clerk, close the roll.
Ayes 9, no zero.
Ayes 9, no zero. The bill is reported.
Woo,
Thank you, Delegate.
Take care.
All right. We also have, I see Delegate Landis out here who has House Bill 916. Then we have Delegate Jones who has House Bill 766 and Delegate Pillion who has House Bill 1553, which are all identical to Senate bills previously passed. What's the pleasure of the committee?
Move to report all three.
Motion properly supported in a block to report House Bill 766, Delegate Jones, House Bill 916, Delegate Landis, and House Bill 1553, Delegate Pillion. Any further discussion? Hearing none, clerk open the roll.
Roll is open, sir.
Cast your votes. Clerk close the roll.
Ayes 9, no zero.
Ayes 9, no zero. The bills are reported. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, let's see. Delegate Myers.
Well, Mr. Chairman, members
Yes,
of the
good morning. House Bill 1473.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, 1473 is a simple accountability measure that would require Virginia public colleges and universities to essentially adopt a public comment period at board meetings. This is a recent trend that has gone on. There's now over 10 different states that now require a public comment period specifically before you raise tuition. I think everybody in this committee has heard from so many parents, and I hear it almost every day, of how we're going to pay for college, the anxiety, the ever-increasing bill, the 226% increase that has happened with Virginia colleges. And so this is simply, I view, a good government bill, an accountability measure. There's now 20 different boards in Virginia that have a public comment period, everything from the Milk Commission to the Apprenticeship Council to the Virginia Employment Commission to the Virginia Aviation Board. And but probably nothing has as much impact on so many Virginia families as our colleges and universities, and it is simply a measure of allowing the parents of those and the students of those that are having to bear the brunt of these seemingly never-ending tuition increases to be able to provide their input to the board. And if it's a pleasure of this committee to pass the bill on to the floor.
Thank you very much. Anyone here to speak either for or against this bill?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm James Toscano. I'm the president of Partners for College Affordability and Public Trust. I'm also here on behalf of Megan Ryan, who's the executive director of the Virginia Coalition for Open Government. This is a simple transparency measure, gives students and parents a voice in one of the biggest decisions that a board has to make, and that's the tuition rate that is set each year. And many, as Delegate Miyares noted, many other Virginia boards and commissions adopt such public participation requirements. And so I would ask that the committee pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak either for or against?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Betsy Daly, University of Virginia. As I shared with the committee last time, I spoke to Senator Peterson's bill, which is very similar to Delegate Mieri's, and I also shared with Delegate Mieri's that the University of Virginia obviously does not oppose seeking input and getting input from students, from parents, from faculty, from the community. Our community of faculty and staff, they were very engaged, and our Board of Visitors information, our president's information, emails, it's all readily available to anyone who would like to contact them. This past fall, William and Mary and UVA, we were among two schools, among the first schools who implemented the 30-day notice policy on proposed tuition increases. And our finance VP had a good conversation with students, helping to explain the rationale behind the increases. And also this year, the board instituted a student comment period during the meeting of the Academic and Student Life Committee, which was coordinated by our student member of the board. Board members are also very engaged in committees throughout the year. They are very much aware of the sentiment and mood of the students and parents on the grounds. And so I would just suggest that one public hearing is not a substitute for a year-round engagement process that goes on at UVA.
Okay,
Thank you.
Yes, Senator Wagner.
Yes, sir.
Hey, you don't have to.
How old
It's
am
her
I?
birthday. Yeah, yeah.
Can I take the fifth before this committee? Is that allowed?
I don't think. Yeah.
Yes.
Happy
There you go.
birthday.
Thank you very
Uh-huh.
much.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Colin Smolinski from William & Mary. Would like to echo the thoughts of my colleague from UVA and also reassure that presently William & Mary and the Board of Visitors encourages year-round engagement and dialogue with stakeholders on and off campus throughout the course of the year. So, thank you.
Thank you. Others? All right. Yes. Delegate Mayers, you want to sum it up then?
Yeah, the only thing I would just ask for this committee is the kind of Virginia that I know is kind of going away. I went to James Madison. I worked my way through college. I'd worked 2 jobs in the summer. I was able to graduate with almost no debt. And that Virginia's gone. And so I have a very good idea what's going to happen with this measure, but I would just ask for the pleasure of this body to realize that, to keep that in mind in the future. And thank you for your time.
All right,
sir.
thank you. Thank you. I also went to JMU, and I have to invite you out to Mount Solon because we're still the old Virginia there. So we'll have to talk to you about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
At any rate, yes. No,
There
it
you
was
go.
JMU. Ron Carrier handed me my diploma.
That's great.
Yes, that's a little extracurricular activity here. At any rate, we had previously heard this bill. It's identical to a Senate bill that we were not so favorable to. But what's the pleasure of the committee?
Mr. Chairman, I move that it be passed by.
Is there a second? Motion properly supported that the bill be passed by indefinitely. Further discussion? Hearing none, clerk open the roll.
Roll is open, sir.
Cast your votes. Clerk close the roll.
Ayes 6, noes 4.
Ayes 6, noes 4. Okay, you did make sport of it. That's,
Thank you. Thank you,
hopefully we
Mr.
can be kinder to you the next time. Thank you. The bill is passed by. Okay, we've got Delegate Lopez.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Good morning.
This is a simple bill. It basically extends the sunset on the green jobs tax credit for an additional 2 years. It's very similar to your bill, Chairman Hanger, and otherwise tax credit will sunset this year. The extension of the sunset is assumed in the official general fund revenue forecast, so this bill will have no impact on the general fund revenue. The green jobs tax credit is basically equal to $500 for each new green job created in Virginia with a salary of at least $50,000. For taxable years 2014 through 16, the department approved a total of 11 applications for the green jobs tax credit and granted $98,500 in credit for taxpayers in every corner of the Commonwealth, from Crozet to Danville to Charlottesville to Fredericksburg. And that's 197 jobs that the green jobs tax credit helped incentivize over the last 2 years. It basically helps create good-paying green jobs in the Commonwealth, and I hope it will be the will of the committee to pass the bill.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Lopez. The only difference is we have kind of a standard formula for extending these, and it would be, we would propose to extend it to 2020 perhaps. That's what the Senate bill did rather than 2019.
That's fine, sir.
If you would not object to that, would someone care to offer that amendment? Motion properly supported to conform House Bill 1372 to the Senate bill previously passed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that is done. Anyone here to speak for or against the bill? Okay, what's the pleasure of the committee? Motion properly supported to report House Bill 1372 as amended. Hearing no further discussion, clerk open the roll.
Roll is open, sir.
Cast your votes. Clerk close the roll.
Ayes 11, no 0.
Ayes 11, no 0. The bill is reported.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Lopez. Okay, Landis, let's see. Any other House patrons here? Delegate, there you are. All right, you have.
House Bill 1441, Mr. Chairman.
1441.
This is the
Yes.
counterpart of Senator Dance's measure, which passed out of House Finance Committee yesterday, I believe, whenever it was.
Okay. I have a note here that, and Senator Dance, has his progressed further than yours? Do you like his version, or what's the deal?
The language is now identical, I believe.
Okay. So, okay, anyone here to speak in opposition to this bill? All right, Senator Dance, what's your pleasure? Motion properly supported to report House Bill 1441. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those, cast your votes.
Roll is open, sir.
Cast your votes. Clerk close the roll.
Ayes 11, no 0.
Ayes 11, no 0. The bill is reported.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Thank you. Okay, Delegate Jones is here? Okay. Delegate Jones. All right. You have House Bill 762 this morning.
I think I've got two, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I've got House Bill 762, which is compensation, a claims or compensation bill.
And Delegate Jones, we've already passed one of your bills in a block.
I think identical to yours, wasn't it?
Yes, that was. We passed that previously.
I thank the committee.
And this is a claims bill.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
This bill before you came over from the House was originally introduced. It was a little unusual in the fact that we had, we're not going to release Norfolk from the responsibility of any claim that might be filed by these four individuals because of their wrongful incarceration and conviction. It was changed when it came to the floor from the committee because Norfolk agreed to match what the state was going to do in this bill, what was offered in this bill. They would release, each claimant would release Norfolk from any further obligation when they receive the funds from the Commonwealth. The difference in this bill, and I do have someone who wants to testify, I think, in support of the bill, this bill does depart from our prior practice in the fact that when they were before then Governor Kane in 2009, information that was presented by the city was, be careful here how I say this, they were not forthcoming and truthful in their representation to the governor. Had they presented the facts as they knew them at the time, those individuals would have been given an unconditional pardon, no question. Only because of, I'll get my dates wrong, I think in 2015, 2016, there was a discovery in a habeas case. I'm outside of my bailiwick here. I'm talking about law attorneys, and I normally don't like to go before the courts committee, so I'm doing the best I can. They discovered that the city was very aware, or let me see, individuals involved in the case were very aware that someone else had committed this crime. They got that individual to confess and say that these other four were involved in it. And so this is extraordinary in its approach by taking the additional years from 2009 until they were given an absolute pardon by Governor McAuliffe. That is the difference with this bill versus those that have come in the past. People have asked me, why did I do this? I felt because it was so egregious in the actions of the body That's why you have this before you in the form that it is.
Okay. And Delegate Jones, I think the committee is basically on board with it. And we have a Senate bill that we passed, and it appears that we probably need to conform your bill so we can get it in conference, because ultimately, the dollar figure will be decided, I suppose, in the budget or in conjunction with the budget. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir, that is correct. And we did put dollars in our budget for the claim bill itself.
Okay, okay. Was there someone here that would specifically speak to it that we need to hear from? Or
Yeah.
extend that courtesy if there is?
Yes,
Oh, we
sir.
don't need to hear from him, I don't think. He's out there.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Anthony Troy, I represent the Norfolk 4. I have been since 2005. I know there's some concern by members about the amount in the House bill in the eyes of paying for, quote, non-incarcerated years. But as Delegate Jones pointed out, what happened in 2009 is Norfolk officials came down and lobbied the Governor Kane, insisting that the guilt existed. What they didn't tell Governor Kane, and what we didn't find out until 2010 and 2011, is that a female Norfolk officer told Mr. Ford immediately when he came out that he had a false confession. They knew that from the beginning, and they went through 4. She sat in a courtroom watching that false confession be admitted to a jury and to a judge. What they didn't tell Governor Kane is that an individual detective swore that he was there, and that Detective Ford did not coerce any confession. What they didn't tell Governor Kane is that that same officer finally admitted under oath yet again that he lied. He wasn't there. And it goes on and on. So the issue here is not for non-incarcerated years. It's for the wrong that was committed. And we need to try to resolve this. And I thank the committee for their attention.
Thank you. And again, Senator Norman has worked on this issue, so I'll yield to him.
Before Mr. Troy leaves, I just want to make it very clear. I'll accept the responsibility while we have the difference in the legislation. And as I have tried to explain in my own inarticulate way, is I want to get together with the House of Delegates and determine what our policy is going to be so that we are consistent. We have never compensated for a loss in this manner, and I'm not saying that we should not, Mr. Troy. What I'm saying is that while we have very unusual circumstances in this fact pattern, if in fact we go forward without a policy, every claims bill that we're going to get, those individuals that have been aggrieved are going to say that their situation is unique, and look what you did for the Norfolk 4. So my objective is to establish a clear and articulate policy that we can uniformly apply going forward. And so I just don't want there to be any misunderstanding that either myself or anyone else is being insensitive or disingenuous to the egregious situations that happen. If we try to look at it from a policy standpoint as opposed to looking at it from a silence.
Mr. Chairman, I understand that. I appreciate that approach. I just wanted to be sure that the uniqueness of this situation was also understood for the conversation.
Okay. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Troy.
Senator Hanger, I would just say, Senator Norman, I have talked to that length, and I would concur with him that we can put it into conference and we can work through those issues.
Okay. With that, is there a motion that the bill be conformed? Motion properly seconded. All those in favor of conforming this bill to the Senate bill previously passed signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any further discussion? Hearing none, is there a motion?
Move to report.
Motion properly supported to report the bill as amended. Clerk, open the roll.
Roll is open, sir.
Cast your votes. Clerk, close the roll.
Ayes 12, no 0.
Ayes 12, no 0. The bill as amended is reported.
I thank the committee.
Thank you, Delegate Jones. Okay, I think we have Delegate Peace's bill yet. Is Delegate Peace here? This one, it was our intent, we've had a Senate bill which is similar to this bill that we previously passed. It was Senator Favola's. Senator Favola, do you want to speak to this bill?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Delegate Peace's bill is very similar to mine, but what it does is it removes that specific program which the Senate Finance Committee put in. We put in that the advisory committee, ABC, was to establish on substance abuse issues in the higher education world.
Okay.
This committee said that that advisory committee was to advise a specific program that ABC hosted, and it was called Heads Up Higher Education Alcohol and Drug Strategic Unified Prevention Program. In conversations in the House, ABC preferred to not have a specific program mentioned, so Delegate Peace's bill removes that program, and that's the difference.
So, Senator Favola, you support his bill over yours?
I support his bill over mine because it's ABC's preference to not have a specific program mentioned. But we can go along with either. We want a mechanism for ABC.
Have you already
to create this committee.
accepted that revision on the House side?
Yes, that.
Okay. I'm in a quandary here now as far as whether we should conform and let y'all work this issue out in conference or whether you're comfortable and there's no fiscal impact with the change.
There's no fiscal impact, and I'm very comfortable with Delegate Peace's bill, which is HB 852.
Okay. What's Senator Norman?
Legislative expediency, we just accept Delegate Peace's bill and the senator could strike her bill.
Well, we probably don't want to do them that fast.
Don't want to do, we'd have to go quite that
Okay.
far for expediency.
Okay, all right. All right, it appears that we could save a little time by not putting in conference, going ahead and accepting the House position. What's the pleasure of the committee? Motion properly supported to report the House bill as it arrived, House Bill 852. Any further discussion? Hearing none, clerk open the roll. Cast your votes. All right, clerk close the roll.
I-16, no zero.
I-16, no zero. We're here in full force now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Favola, for helping out. That concludes our docket. Our next order of business is a briefing from staff, so I will turn that over to April and Jason. If you will go ahead and if all the members will give their attention, that will be great.
I should stay away more often. Look how efficient.
Sarah, you can lead it off.
I will lead off this morning, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, good morning, Sarah.
Good morning. This is our overview of the Senate Finance Committee amendments that were presented in the subcommittee reports on Sunday. These are a package of about 28 amendments to Senate Bill 29 and about 380 amendments to Senate Bill 30. The actual half sheets are hot off the presses. These will be on your desks at noon today. We will be going in the same order that we used in January to overview the introduced budget for the areas. First, just a brief overview and summary of the resources before we proceed by area. The priorities you see in the amendments are to maintain a strong cash position, and the cash reserve will have a balance of $336 million by the end of the next biennium, and this puts us on a path to phase in towards the 2% goal over 4 years. The bulk of the new spending you see in the amendments is above the FY18 base is for the Medicaid forecast and SOQ rebenchmarking. There are also some actions that support community-based services for mentally ill, that protect the new higher education operating financial aid funding that was proposed in the introduced budget, and some infrastructure investments. As you recall from the December-January time period, there were some additional general fund resources in Senate Bill 29 of almost $300 million. The key point on this slide is that the Senate Finance Committee actions and the amendments provide an additional $6.4 million in Senate Bill 29, which will roll into 30. So here you see that that additional 6.4 from 29 increases your beginning balance starting point for Senate Bill 30. The Senate Finance Committee actions do provide additional $42 million in resources that Chairman Hanger mentioned on Sunday, primarily from continuing the limits on the historic rehabilitation tax credits and the land preservation tax credits. There's also some resources related to ABC and balance transfers in that piece. And in sum total, there's net additional spending in the amendments of $46 million. We don't have a slide here on this, but just to put together the big picture of how the components of the proposed budget work that you'll see as we go through by area. The amendments do reverse the savings related to Medicaid expansion of $422 million, and this occurs both in the HHR area and in public safety. And the budget is balanced through a combination of the reversal of the proposed actions on compensation, these resources you see here on page 6, and lower than proposed spending in K-12 education, higher education, HHR, and public safety and the other areas, as well as the phased cash reserve. So with that as an overview, I will turn it over to Charles for Commerce and Trade.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I want to start with Go Virginia. There were a number of actions taken here related to Go Virginia. First and foremost, the committee did endorse the governor's recommendation to appropriate $24.5 million each year to the Growth and Opportunity Fund. Secondly, there was some sensitivity to the fact that a portion of these grants are allocated to regions based on their share of the population. In some of the rural regions, that share turns out to be rather small. So there is language that authorizes the Go Virginia Board to reallocate grant funding to some of the rural regions if demand exceeds the allocations in the budget. Also, we have language that authorizes the board to allocate up to $637,000 per year from the fund to cover additional administrative costs, that in rather than doing a general fund appropriation. There's also a reversal of $3.2 million non-general fund appropriation, which was from unused capacity building funding. The purpose there was to correct a mistake, I think, that some of these funds had already been committed by the regional councils. And lastly, the committee accepted the governor's proposal to override the requirement in statute that no more than 90% of monies in the fund be awarded in any fiscal year. This next slide has a number of other actions in commerce and trade. I won't go through each one individually. I will draw your attention to the top line, which is the Virginia Jobs Investment Program. The committee did reduce funding in this program by $4.5 million. That is because this program is partly duplicative of a new proposed program called the Custom Workforce Recruitment and Training Incentive Program, which is the fourth line from the bottom. Some other actions, the committee did recognize some savings from having the VEDP staff provide staff to the Virginia Israel Advisory Board. We also recommend moving the Small Business Jobs Grant and Small Business Investment Grant Fund from the Department of Small Business and Supplier Diversity to VEDP to administer. I mentioned the Custom Workforce Program. We actually reduced that by $1.1 million in order to provide additional marketing dollars to VEDP. Lastly, on this slide, the committee does have an additional $365,000, a modest increase for operating support to Fort Monroe. This is in recognition of the additional 70-plus acres that the Fort Monroe Authority has taken. In Department of Housing and Community Development, the budget does include $2.5 million for the Virginia Grocery Investment Fund. There is also additional investment in broadband in the Virginia Telecommunication Initiative, up to $8 million over the biennium. As I mentioned, the administrative support for Go Virginia was reversed. Rather, we included the authorization for the board to allocate monies from the fund. There's an increase in the Enterprise Zone Program, up to $13.5 million each year. The committee does reverse proposed spending in solar energy development incentives, and there is a reversal of a proposed increase in small business and supplier diversity for software upgrades. There are a couple other items here. I don't think I need to go into any more detail. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to pass the lectern over to my colleague.
Turning now quickly to higher education. Senate Bill 30, the introduced plus our amendments result in an increase of about $212 million. That's down a little bit over $30 million from the introduced. Much of those actions, just as it was in the introduced, are from some technical adjustments that would have been reflected in the base in some other years. That gets us to the biggest chunk of money, about $51 million for support of base operations and need-based undergraduate financial aid. There's $28.1 million for base operations at Old Dominion, George Mason, VCU, James Madison, VMI, Richard Bland, and EVMS. Those amounts are in the second year. The first year amounts were deferred for other actions. I will tell you by institution, Old Dominion, it's $10.1 million, EVMS, $3.4 million, VMI, $500,000, Richard Bland, about $100,000, George Mason, $10 million, VCU, $4 million, and James Madison, $4 million. Moving on to undergraduate need-based financial aid, it's $22.8 million, or 50% of what was included in the introduced budget. And just to mention, the research money was retained under the Virginia Research Investment Committee. Moving on to the summary table on the next page, we'll skip the first two rows, as I just covered that. There were a number of projects at UVA-Wise, Virginia State, and the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, or VIMS, related to technology infrastructure. Those amendments received about a 25% reduction and were phased. Moving on to UVA-Wise enhanced academic programs. Funding for new programs was deferred, but there was an amount that we felt related to enrollment loss, and that goes forward with the ability to revisit that in the second year. Moving on to the workforce credential grant, there were no reductions to that, so there exists $2 million in each year on that one, and an amendment in Senate Bill 29 for an additional $1 million on that. Moving on to funding that falls underneath the State Council of Higher Education for Virginia. I won't mention the previous amounts that we covered in the introduced budget, but I will say there's an initiative for the online textbooks to reduce costs for degrees, some small money for the transfer grant, some small money for the student loan ombudsman that passed the Senate, and a pilot program for internships at about $200,000 per year. Moving on to the higher education centers, those received a slight reduction, so to phase into the new amounts related to that. There's workforce programs at a number of those and operation and maintenance funding. Moving on to the tuition assistance grant, or TAG, what we found was it's in sort of late breaking projections that there wouldn't be enough money to cover that in the first year. So when you see the amendment, $1 million is going to move from the second year into the first year for the ability to cover that. Moving on to Norfolk State's, the cybersecurity and cyber psychology and biofuels research programs, the subcommittee decided that those programs would be best funded under research and would have the ability to go to the Virginia Research Investment Council, or committee, excuse me. And then under other, that's just sort of a blob of all the other things that get rolled into here. What I will mention are some of the changes. There was reduction in the monitoring funding at VIMS in lieu of operation and maintenance funding. There was an elimination of a new program at William & Mary in lieu of a separate program that will start in the second year and be phased in. There was an elimination of some planning funding under the community college and the restoration of a cut that was taken as part of the base actions at the New College Institute. And that concludes higher education, unless there are other questions. Thank you.
Good morning again. Picking up with K-12 education and other education. Slide 15 is a summary table. To refresh your memories, the base budget for direct aid for FY18 was just over $6 billion. The introduced budget did include about $500 million additional over the biennium in general funds, and the Senate Finance Committee amendments included some technical and non-general fund related amendments related to lottery proceeds. In Senate Bill 29, it was under $400,000 in those technical amendments. In FY 19 and 20, $7.6 million. It's down on general funds in 19 and 14.1 in 20. Other than those technical and non-general fund amendments, the Senate Finance Committee amendments result in a reduction compared to the introduced budget of $5.3 million in FY 19 and $59.9 million in FY 20. driven largely in the second year by the reversal of the proposed 2% salary increase in December 2019. But the combined total additional over FY18 is still over $500 million. Slide 16 is the first of 3 slides that summarize the actions in direct aid. So you can see the top line, it maintains the rebenchmarking funding. The second is the reversal of the compensation action. On the third line, the amendments do maintain the proposed increase in at-risk add-on funding of $7.1 million in the second year, and also adds language indicating that the funding in at-risk add-on can be allocated towards teacher recruitment initiatives in those school divisions. The next line, there was a proposal for FY19 no-loss funding that related to both composite index and enrollment loss, and this was reversed, and in lieu of it, on the following line is $5 million for an extended enrollment loss funding similar to the approach taken last session in FY17. The committee amendments did not approve the proposal to fund a full-time principal in small elementary schools that was included in the introduced budget. And do continue the FY18 levels of governor's school funding, which could have been included as part of the base. There's 2 amendments which are level funding the positive behavior intervention support, which does have $1.1 million in the base budget without the additional proposed amounts. And the amendments approve a lower amount for a new fund for principal recruitment and retention in school divisions that have operating under MOUs with the State Board of Education. On slide 17 shows some other savings, a couple technical updates, net updates there on the first line. Also additional adjustments to lottery proceeds forecasts, assuming a 1% growth in lottery proceeds in FY19 and 20. The next line reflects the savings over 2 years by removing the local school board member costs from the SOQ. The following line is $4.5 million in savings over 2 years by updating the school breakfast reimbursement base year from FY 2004 to FY 2009. There is still an increase in this program. I think it's up to about $7 million by FY 20, even with this action. And then continuing the action begun last year to continue the phased elimination of project graduation. This is 50% in 19 and full elimination in 20. And the removal of a small item related to praxis assistance for provisionally licensed teachers. On spending and direct aid, on slide 18, there's about $10 million related to early childhood and Virginia Preschool Initiative package, which will be detailed on the next slide. There's also an additional $1.5 million that the subcommittee approved for teacher residency models, an increase of $1.4 million for regional career and technical education centers for $60,000 each, an increase above the increase in the introduced budget for the Project Discovery Post-Secondary Access Program, some new funding for a career and technical education innovation school in the Winchester area. On the Virginia Reading Corps, the asterisk athlete should be in that middle column there. It simply moves second year funding in the introduced to the first year and adds language. There is additional $250,000 for a high school apprenticeship program in Richmond City, an increase for the early childhood STEM teacher program that operates from Wolf Trap, and about $200,000 in the first year for STEM teacher recruitment initiatives, and another small item related to 11th grade assessments. On the package of early childhood related items, there are several. The first adds $4.6 million per year to increase the per pupil amount for Virginia Preschool Initiative from $6,125 to $6,500. And this would be for research-based curriculum or related professional development. The dollars also include a minimum floor of 9 slots per school division for the handful of divisions that were not eligible for any VPI funding previously. It's also language that clarifies that the match requirements for VPI can be met with non-governmental funds and allows a limited provisional waiver of teacher bachelor's degree requirements, which was a recommendation of the School Readiness Committee. The next adds $250,000 per year for classroom observations of all VPI classrooms by the end of 2020, which was a large focus of the December 2017 JLARC report. The amendments maintain new funding for statewide implementation of the Virginia Kindergarten Readiness Assessment. There's also language that updates the charge of the Legislative Joint Subcommittee on the Virginia Preschool Initiative, which began in 2015. Turning to the Department of Education, The amendments approve the automated teacher licensure process, but do capture estimated savings and move the dollars into the first year rather than building it into an ongoing base adjustment. Approve the funds to align the student services funding to ensure federal IDEA grant compliance. Similar to the previous item and one of the previous slides, the e-media funding is simply a shift between the 2 years. The introduced budget proposed it in the second, and this evens it out between the 2 years. The committee did not approve proposed new funding for environmental education in Department of Education, nor a couple lines down on the new advisory council for digital citizenship. And those are the only changes relative to introduced here on those smaller items. To wrap up Department of Education, the amendments also add $300,000 per year related to social studies assessments, $290,000 per year for additional training for teachers related to literacy and dyslexia. And there's language directing DOE to develop and administer a school climate survey or personnel survey within their existing resources, as well as language directing DOE to evaluate options related to the student growth models for the SOLs and report to the Commission on elementary and secondary, the future of elementary and secondary education. There are amendments in item 30, which provides annual funding for the Legislative Commission on the future of elementary and secondary education, and also a separate amendment directing the Commission to develop a plan related to small school divisions, consolidating, jointly operating, contracting, or otherwise sharing services. That completes K-12. The next slide is on the other education agencies. On slide 22, the committee approved a couple of items proposed in the introduced budget, funding for the Library of Virginia's updated electronic record system, as well as some operation and maintenance funding for the Robinson House at the Museum of Fine Arts, which will be opening shortly. The amendments also add funding for maximizing the 2019 commemorations at Jamestown, Yorktown, for an exhibit, lecture series, and additional marketing. Also add funding for the library aid formula that Library of Virginia distributes to the local libraries. And the amendments approve $250,000 for the Eastern Shore Library construction and an increase to Commission for the Arts in the second year of $250,000. And I have just one quick slide on retirement too. There were really no changes to the rates in the introduced budget. This is just a reminder that the committee's actions do fully fund the board rates, and it's consistent with the actions in the introduced budget. That completes my portion.
Okay. Any questions from any member at the podium or in the audience on this particular section, either for Sarah or, okay? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start on Health and Human Resources.
Okay.
Just looking at the caboose bill, Senate Bill 29 real quick, you will see there are only a few actions in the caboose bill. Pretty much what you will see in Health and Human Resources is that the mandatory programs from Medicaid, Children's Health Insurance Program, a variety of programs are all fully funded throughout both Senate Bill 29 and Senate Bill 30. In the caboose bill, there were basically probably the biggest adjustment was just a change in the assumption for tobacco tax estimates for the healthcare fund, which is used to support the state match for Medicaid. So there was $2.4 million additional revenue there that in savings that goes to the bottom line, and also a few other minor low priority spending items for agencies. Also, the elimination of the administrative costs that were included in the caboose bill related to the expansion of Medicaid, as well as the amendments remove the authority from the caboose bill for an expansion of Medicaid, as well as the imposition of the hospital provider assessment. Moving on to Senate Bill 30, what you'll see is this slide just gives you kind of the overview of the aggregate numbers for HHR. I won't go through it in great detail. It's just to note, you can see the committee amendments, the increases and decreases. The net change is about $290 million in additional general fund added. That's mainly driven by the fact that the savings from Medicaid expansion, of course, had to be restored within the HHR area. There were a few targeted general fund investments that the committee also did, which we will go over as we go forward. So this slide is just to summarize kind of the major policy and funding items in Senate Bill 30. It's already mentioned expansion of Medicaid, the authority, as well as The funding was reversed in the introduced budget. And just to give you just a quick background, as you recall, the total savings that were incorporated throughout the budget from the expansion of Medicaid was $421.7 million. Then the introduced budget also included a provider assessment on hospitals, which would cover the $307 million in cost of expansion. So that's how you get to the $421 million number is the cost of 307, the net savings to expansion of 114 gets you the 421.7, which was then reallocated as spending throughout the budget. So then quickly, you also see, and I'll have a couple slides just to show you the total investment. The committee adopted virtually all of the funding that was included in the budget for the DOJ settlement agreement, as well as the investments made for behavioral health on both the community and behavioral health facility side. And lastly, I just wanted to note, as the committee had passed Senate Bill 915, which is the Priority Needs Access Program, unfortunately, the resources weren't there to make any investments in that program, so the amendments simply indicate that the priority of the committee going forward when funding is available is such that it would continue to expand the GAP program for the mentally ill, as well as to other vulnerable groups as well as continuing to reiterate the major priority of the committee is to continue to address at some point the priority one wait list for the Medicaid waivers, which at this point, if you add to what was in the introduced budget, it would require about 2,300 additional slots in this biennium to eliminate that wait list. So like I said, one of the big priorities in the introduced budget, as well as for this committee, was of course continuing our investment and I think transformation of the community behavioral health system. This slide gives you the summary of all the committee adopted much of what was in the introduced budget, which included things like making same-day access at all 40 CSBs, moving to the next step, which was primary care screening, which is the second step of STEP Virginia, of making consistent services throughout the CSBs. The committee did actually have to slow down that implementation just to come up with some savings. There's also $5 million per year to backfill federal funding that was provided for medication-assisted treatment. The committee did actually set aside about 20% of that funding going forward to be used for non-narcotic medications. The committee adopted permanent supportive housing, which is certainly a major initiative of this committee over the last few years. There was $7.1 million in the introduced budget for that. And you'll see there's a variety of other things, discharge assistance planning that was actually reduced by about 50% from the introduced budget. And I will note the last five there were sort of recommendations that came from the Deeds Commission that looks at the transforming the mental health system. The committee amendments include creating a statewide alternate transportation model for temporary detention orders that would begin to be rolled out statewide over about a 3-year period. So you'll see funding in the amendments for that. Also adding discharge assistance or discharge planning in 2 local jails with a high level of mentally ill. A telemental health pilot program is included. Also funding Intercept 2 diversion program. So Intercept 2 is after the interaction with law enforcement. These are the initial court appearances that, so this is actually creating programs in 3 localities to help try to figure out how to divert people with mental illness to more appropriate treatment options, as well as expanding CIT training in rural communities. There's funding for grants to expand this to 6 more. So the total investments of community behavioral health are just over $54 million. Moving on, this slide, just very quickly, in behavioral health facilities, there's over $30 million. Much of this was in the introduced budget that the committee adopted. The one thing I would note is the first one, electronic health records. The committee did include language to create an interagency work group to actually look at making a statewide integrated electronic health record system. The Department of Behavioral Health already has a vendor for this, and essentially what the work group would be doing is advancing this to the Department of Health that needs to have electronic health records. And ultimately the idea is that this would also incorporate the Department of Corrections facilities so that the state would actually have one vendor statewide that so individuals that actually interact with different agencies, that we would actually have a comprehensive electronic health record for different agencies to utilize and serve in those people. So the only other thing I will highlight is several of these items are related to the Virginia Center for Behavioral Rehabilitation, which is nearing capacity. The only change the committee made there was we used a lower cost estimate for the hepatitis C treatment for some of the residents of VCBR. So this slide just summarizes the DOJ settlement agreement spending. Like I said, the committee adopted most of the funding, which is primarily dedicated for the 825 waiver slots that's required by the agreement, as well as expanding crisis services. And the one thing that I would note is that on the state rental assistance program, we did actually, the committee did reduce the second year by $1 million, but as you can see, that still leaves $4.6 million across the biennium for rental assistance, which is to help individuals with developmental disabilities live independently. This slide actually is a list of the committee's adopted kind of targeted spending items within Health and Human Resources. So you see the first one is about $1.7 million. It's kind of to fund the next cohort of graduate medical residency slots in Medicaid. This is a program the committee had backed in the 2016 session and continues. So this is actually using Medicaid funds to help fund the slot so that we can continue to put more residents in the pipeline and address some of the workforce shortages with doctors and such. You also see there's an item to restore the state match for Medicaid supplemental payments to 2 of our state mental health hospitals. Basically, the federal government in a recent change delayed the reductions to the disproportionate share hospital payment program, and essentially this restores the payments to those hospitals. You'll actually see in a savings strategy where the general fund that was backfilling that was pulled out of the budget. Also note there's $1.1 million in the second year for Alexandria Health Department. Since we have a statewide system of health departments where the state and local share costs, any relocation or rent or whatever that the localities would pay is, in this case, a relocation into a co-located facility, the state would actually have to pay its 55% cost for that. There's also a second-year increase in the auxiliary grant rate, which assists individuals, low-income individuals in assisted living facilities. There's a $35 increase in the introduced budget, and there's $25 in the committee amendments to continue to increase that rate to a more appropriate level. There are target investments also in brain injury case management services, addressing wait lists for aging services, the long-term care ombudsman program, as well as long-term employment support services. You can see the amounts up there. There's $100,000 in the budget to fund the JLARC recommendations in the health department to review health risk and sample testing for biosolids. There's $100,000 per year for Southwest Virginia Health Wagon, and you'll see a few miscellaneous items such as extending the TANF transitional services program from 12 to 24 months for those people that are in post-secondary education. The Family Match Adoption Program, which is a web-based system to help better connect parents interested in being foster parents or adoptive parents with the state services, as well as the Kinship Care Guardianship Program, which was authorized in Senate Bill 44 and Senate Bill 636 that passed the Senate. I would just highlight real quickly in the TANF budget, as for temporary assistance for needy families, as caseloads continue to decline, as the economy, of course, improves, the actual cash balance in the block grant continues to grow. The year-end FY18 year-end cash balance is estimated to be $118 million. So the amendments actually do provide some additional funding for items that we have previously included in the past. So $2 million a year for community employment and training grants. This is a program that was started last year, and it's essentially a program that localities can apply for them basically to develop innovative strategies to help reduce poverty. There's $2 million per year for community action agencies for them to continue to better comply with federal requirements and how they provide services to citizens. $300,000 each year for child advocacy centers. This is really related to them expanding into other parts of the state. $300,000 over the biennium for Facets Homeless Services. This is a program in Fairfax that helps provide support for homeless individuals. Lastly, I will note that the introduced budget had included $6 million per year for a 2-year pilot program for basically long-acting reversible contraception. This is something the committee actually had adopted last year. Pretty much all the funding is essentially adopted The only change to it was that it's intended to be for hormonal long-acting reversible contraception, and the language was just modified to make sure that it was focused on people that meet the current requirements of the health department, like up to 250% of poverty, et cetera. So as I mentioned, the savings in HHR, I'll try to go through this quickly. The largest savings actually came from the federal government in a recent change, actually suspended an Affordable Care Act insurance tax. This gets passed through to the state through its Medicaid managed care programs. That saves $42 million general fund in the second year. You also see there's an amendment, the expenditure growth in CSA services. There's actually language that directing, the introduced budget actually had money in there for a pilot. I'm sorry, not a pilot, but a study of the rates and the rate methodologies that's used for private day educational services. And essentially, there's language that would limit, until that study is complete, that would limit growth in those rates by 2% a year. That would generate some savings. The committee amendments eliminate the overtime for consumer-directed attendance. It also eliminates the 2% rate increase that was included in the budget for that purpose, although the committee did adopt the $500,000 per year in training for consumer-directed attendance. As I previously mentioned, the schedule for rolling out primary care screening as part of the STEP Virginia program to the CSBs is basically just being delayed into the second year. The adjustments for the revenue for tobacco taxes in the healthcare fund carried forward from the caboose bill into the big bill to generate $2.3 million in savings per year. You also see the introduced budget had included funding for the reprocurement of a call center, a Medicaid call center. The committee actually took the funding out for that, but specified language to actually merge that call center with the Department of Social Services call center, so that there would actually be some savings there, and there'd just be one consolidated call center for all benefit programs. As well as I mentioned, the electronic health record system. The first year funding for the health department is just taken out. Their second year funding, the $4.2 million remains. That's actually intended, has to do with the fact that this idea of a statewide integrated system, the health department couldn't begin to come onto the system until it's up and running, and that would start in the second year. The last thing I'll note, one of the things that we did pull out of related to behavioral health was there was funding included in the introduced budget related to acquiring 2 assisted living facilities to try to move people out of the state hospitals. The committee did take that out, as well as reduce some of the discharge assistance planning that had been included in the introduced budget. The other HHR savings that I'll go over real quick, I already mentioned the dish payments, backfill that savings. There was money in the introduced budget related to free clinics. The committee took that out, as well as some administrative items. The Office of Immigrant Assistance was a bill that actually failed, so that was pulled out of the budget, as well as funding to mandate the meningococcal vaccine prior to entry to the 6th grade. There was no bill on the Senate side, but the one on the House side has also failed. So that pulls that money out of the budget, and then there's a few other administrative items you can see there at the bottom. The last thing I would talk about in HHR, there's always a lot of language amendments. So you will see that there's actually language that creates a work group. This is something that's been recommended in the past, and the issue related to CSA-funded private day placements. So it's a work group to begin to look at what are the outcomes that the state should actually be focused on in those settings. There's also language per Senate Bill 205 that allows CSA funding to be used on a pilot basis for a public school-based day program that exists, that if it's a good alternative to a private placement, that CSA dollars could be used to fund that. There's language included in the budget for a 1-year moratorium on the building of new freestanding emergency departments to basically give time for the Joint Commission on Administrative Rules to determine if certificate of public need should apply in those cases. There's also language directing actuary review of the Medicaid managed care programs, which part of that is actually to look at whether or not we should combine the 2 programs into one that currently exists. There's also language directing kind of a study to look at how do we continue to transform our behavioral health system in Medicaid. Language to direct DMAS to kind of undertake an organizational review to see how the agency can evolve and better oversee the managed care delivery system, which primarily that's what Medicaid is now. There's also language that allows a private hospital in the Lynchburg area to actually develop a public-private partnership for Central Virginia Training Center to care for the residents there. And I've already talked about the interagency work group for electronic health records. The last thing I would just note is that in the Commonwealth Coordinated Care Plus program, which is the newer managed care program that includes long-term care services, there are 6 health plans that participate, and there certainly have been some issues with that not all hospital systems will contract with the plans. So there's language included in the budget that says that for hospitals to be eligible for supplemental payments that are funded through Medicaid, that they would have to fully participate in the Commonwealth Care Coordinated Plus program. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my remarks for HHR.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions for Mike at this point? Okay, we'll move on then.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning,
I will
Caitlin.
quickly go over the public safety section of the budget. For SB 29, the committee budget adopts the introduced caboose bill proposals for public safety, which are specifically $5 million for increased medical costs at the Department of Corrections, $125,000 for overtime at Department of Forensic Science to address its controlled substances and biology backlogs, and an increase of $1.1 million to ABC net profit transfers to the general fund. And for the biennial budget, SB 30, the finance amendments add $24 million in general funds and $3.1 million in non-general funds above the introduced amounts, which includes replacing 44.1 million reduction to DOC that was a part of the proposed Medicaid expansion. So moving to Department of Corrections line items, I mentioned that the Medicaid expansion reduction was put back into the budget. And for inmate healthcare overall, the Senate amendments endorse a $32.3 million increase over DOC's base appropriation level for medical care, plus the $3.7 million in non-general funds that was proposed in the introduced budget. The amendments include an additional $2.8 million in the first year for the department to increase medical staff at Fluvanna Correctional Center for Women. And the Senate amendments, the reductions are driven by an assumption that providers will accept the Medicaid rate for inpatient services and a newly approved lower cost drug for hepatitis C treatment. The amendments maintain the introduced budget proposals for staff for specialized mental health units for the seriously mentally ill, residential opioid treatment for lower security offenders, and additional medical and mental health staff for lower level female offenders at the Central Virginia Correctional Unit for Women, which will allow the department to fill additional beds. The subcommittee recommends an additional $100,000 over the biennium to convert one of the existing 2 part-time jail death investigators to full-time status. And the committee amendments also include funding to reimburse DMV for the costs of providing offenders with ID cards upon reentry, and Corrections Special Reserve funding for SB 47, which creates a new felony. In addition to the language that requires Medicaid pricing for inpatient, there's language requirement that DOC participate in the new statewide electronic healthcare record system, and reporting requirements for healthcare data and a capital needs assessment. Okay. For the Department of State Police, the Senate budget recommends the introduced proposals for a second special operations unit in the 6th Division and additional operating support to supplant grant funds for the Commonwealth Link to Interoperable Communications System. The finance budget recommends that a portion of the introduced general fund amounts for 2 helicopters could be funded by non-general funds, and then recommends the full general fund portion for the med-flight helicopter. Additionally, the budget recommends funding for a full-time aviation mechanic in the 4th Division and has not recommended the other introduced budget proposals for polygraphs, background check technicians for firearm sales, and fusion center analysts. And then the notes at the bottom are related to non-general fund recommendations for $4.1 million from the safety fund for enhancement to the computerized criminal history system, and $800,000 from the sex offender registry fund for an upgrade of the billing system so that background checks for employment could be expedited. And there's language to allow the Department of State Police to assess a $5 fee for criminal and traffic cases where a state agency wrote the summons. Okay. For ABC, the finance budget fully recommends the introduced proposals for the cost of goods sold, the email and SharePoint software acquisitions, and the sales audit system acquisitions. The budget partially recommends the amount for the point of sales system replacement, which was adjusted to spread the full project costs more evenly across 5 years, which has been the practice with other projects. And the personnel requests were adjusted to remove the staff for existing high-volume stores and a portion of the part-time to full-time conversions. The remaining amounts fund full-time positions and wages and overhead costs for 8 new stores per year and conversion of 25 positions to full-time rather than the requested 50 conversions. And the enforcement amounts were amended to more accurately align with projected revenues from SB 884. Finally, the estimated net profit transfers to the general fund are assumed to increase by $5.9 million above what was included in the introduced budget, and there's language in Part 3 to require those transfers. The budget eliminates proposed funding for the Secretary of Public Safety to assess and upgrade the state's interoperability needs, but maintains language that requires a report on those needs. And the budget maintains proposed funding for 8 new scientists and equipment at DFS in controlled substances, biology, and digital multimedia sections, as well as $90,000 for the DNA data bank to capture 2 additional misdemeanors as a recommendation of the Crime Commission. And the amendments also maintained an emergency coordinator at the Department of Military Affairs to coordinate with VDEM, state police, and other state agencies. And at DCJS, aid to localities with police departments was adjusted to provide a flat $6.6 million per year in additional funding. And there's also new funding in post-critical incident services for law enforcement. And I'll just mention that there's a technical amendment in the Office of the Secretary of Public Safety to consolidate base funding in order to provide the full $1.5 million that's required for state matching funds to an Army Corps of Engineers flood study in 1 year, which is how the funding is expected to be spent. And that concludes my summary, unless there are any questions.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. Questions? All right, we'll move on then. Jason?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quickly, Veterans Affairs, $600,000 in savings primarily from 2 actions, which was reducing a proposed increase in the Secretary's office and reversing and reducing new positions proposed for the agency. We do endorse the proposal for expansion of benefit services offices for cemetery operations and for funding the new Veterans Care Centers when they come online beginning in fiscal 2020. Turning to agriculture and forestry, those savings totaled $200,000 over the biennium. Again, that was primarily generated by reversing savings in the Secretary's office. We did maintain funding for the hemp program, which is legislation that has passed the Senate, level funding of the APHID grant program. We reversed the nursery capacity proposal, but did provide that funding back in the reforestation of timberlands program. And natural resources, the SFC actions retain the statutory deposit to the Water Quality Improvement Fund of $22.5 million, and we provide an additional $5.2 million over the biennium to a dedicated reserve funding. This comes from increasing the annual transfer of unrefunded boat fuel sales and dedicate to $10 million in total and dedicating $2.5 per year, slightly more than that, to the WQIF reserve. We include offsetting reductions to land acquisition programs, primarily at the Virginia Outdoors Foundation and the Land Conservation Foundation, in recognition of amounts that have been recently received through the natural resources settlements in the past 6 months. We reversed the proposal for expanding Wi-Fi connectivity at state parks. We do provide operational funding to open 2 new parks. That would be Widewater and Seven Bends. And we retain all of the language and NGF amendments that were included in the introduced relative to the Surrey Skiffs Creek and DuPont mitigation agreements that do have non-general funds appropriated. This simply covers those actions in a little bit more detail, and I will note that we reduced the transfer to the Game Protection Fund in fiscal year 18 to pick up $1.6 million on the revenue track, but we do continue to provide $33.7 million a year from the general fund to the Game Protection Fund. Natural resources capital outlay, we reversed the proposal to provide $20 million for the Alexandria CSO. The subcommittee elected instead to recommend $20 million for stormwater local assistance funding. We retained the rest of the natural resources capital outlay actions, except for a proposal general infrastructure blanket project of $4 million in bond proceeds. We do provide a supplemental of $7.5 million for historical civilian conservation corps cabin renovation projects. Turning to transportation, we recommend phasing in the line of credit for Real ID implementation by reducing that amount to $10.5 million from the $20 million that was in the introduced. We also recommend reducing by 1/3 the number of new FTEs, proposing 57 new FTEs statewide for implementation of the Real ID program. That line of credit would be repaid by a $10 surcharge on customers choosing to purchase the compliant credentials. We do include the proposal for replacing a fuels tax system and have language directing DMV to provide that fuels tax information to the regional transportation authorities so that they may better manage their finance programs when they go to the bond markets. There is also actions that would generate about $1.1 million per year for DMV. That is imposing a $6 processing fee on the vital records that are available for purchase at DMV, with most of the money that goes to the health department. And then, as Caitlin mentioned, directing DOC and providing general funds for them to reimburse DMV for the cost of credentials for offenders that are reentering. At Mass Transit, it removes the language within DRPT that authorized $110 million in transit capital bonds. It removes the proposed authorization of regional taxes as Senator Saslaw's Senate Bill 856 is the preferred vehicle for providing dedicated funding and meaningful reforms to WMATA. At the Department of Transportation, a couple of minor language amendments correct an erroneous interpretation by VDOT of the county maintenance payment statutes. We direct a review of cost and financing for special and unique structures, including the Norris Bridge and the Big Walker Mountain Tunnel. We have language requiring any toll proceeds or concession payments from actively managed lanes and Hampton roads be used to reduce the HR TAC contributions to the cost of the HRBT. At the Port Authority, we maintain the planning funding only for the widening and deepening of the Norfolk Harbor Channel and the southern branch of the Elizabeth River. We direct and authorize up to $2 million from the Commonwealth Development Opportunity Fund for the Port Economic Grant Zone Program, and we reduce the proposed additional, we remove the additional 21 positions that were proposed for the Port Authority. Looking at capital projects, at the port, we did not reduce any of the port's proposed capital projects that are primarily equipment for expansions that have already taken place. Transportation capital projects writ large, as I mentioned, we did reduce the transit capital project and we left the other VDOT-funded capital projects in place as well. Nothing in transportation. I'll turn to general government quickly. Technology, we did reduce or reverse and eliminated the Secretary of Technology, thereby reducing by $600,000 and 5 FTE the Secretary's office. We restore one position and about $300,000 over in the Secretary of Administration, or $200,000, I'm sorry, over in the Secretary of Administration for the Chief Data Officer. It is our intent to move the Center for Innovative Technology to the Secretary of Commerce and Trade and to move the Virginia Information Technologies Agency to the Department of Administration during enrolling. I've looked at the House amendments. They do have it. The clock ran out on the Senate budget being able to include those amendments. The rest of the bullets on that slide are all endorsements of actions that were included in the introduced budget, of which I will not go into great detail on. If there are no questions, that brings it to Adam.
Okay. No questions? All right, thank you, Jason. Adam?
Morning, sir. So to begin moving into the judicial, executive offices, and administration areas, I'll just touch on a few of these items, but for mental health dockets, $500,000 is provided over the biennium for new mental health dockets or the expansion of existing mental health dockets. And previously, these haven't received general fund support, but have been funded through a combination of asset forfeiture proceeds, local funding, and federal grant funding. Looking at the drug courts, $200,000 is provided in the second year to expand the number of drug treatment court programs operating in the state, with funding allocated in a manner prescribed by the Drug Treatment Court Advisory Committee. Looking at criminal waivers, $1.1 million is provided over the biennium for criminal waivers for court-appointed counsel above the initial cap. And this is based on the current and projected volume of requests and approvals related to criminal cases. As Jason mentioned, there's a chief data officer position, so about $200,000 is provided each year to establish that position in the Office of the Secretary of Administration, and that's being funded through an appropriation transfer from the Technology Secretariat, which has been eliminated. For the Help America Vote Act, or HAVA, $7.1 million is provided for HAVA, given the depletion of those grant funds, and this reflects a reduction of about $3.3 million over the biennium. For body cameras, so this is a language requiring localities that employ the use of body-worn cameras for law enforcement patrol officers to provide one assistant Commonwealth's attorney at a rate of 1 ACA per 50 body cameras used. And this is to address the volume of the footage that the assistant Commonwealth's attorneys are having to review as a result of those body cameras. And then there is language directing DHRM to implement a shared savings incentive program, which would financially incentivize plan members to be cost-conscious when selecting healthcare services. And this is projected to save between $4 million and $7 million annually when fully implemented. So moving into finance, compensation, and central appropriations. Again, the revenue cash reserve, $180 million is provided over the biennium for the revenue cash reserve. So this is combined with $156 million that's in SB 29, which would bring the total to $336.4 million. And this reflects the phased-in approach with the intent of making additional deposits over a 4-year period that would total $426.4 million through FY 2022. There's language related to AST that would direct the Department of Taxation to convene a work group to examine the current AST requirements to include the expansion of hardship exceptions and easier hardship application processes and a potential phase out of the AST by 2022 with a report on the work group's findings delivered by the start of the 2019 session. Norfolk 4, that was discussed. $1.8 million was provided in the first year, and this reflects the statutory method for calculating the amount of relief. The Management Fellows Program, $700,000 was provided over the biennium to fund an additional cohort of the program. There's also some language associated with that would state that existing employees who otherwise meet the academic requirements of the program are not precluded from consideration for program participation. And there's also language that would direct the Secretary of Finance to complete a report following the completion of the first cohort detailing the efficacy of the program to meet the state's employment objectives. The raise, the employee raise, $49.4 million in the second year for a 2% state and state-supported local employee raise in the second year that would have been effective December 1st, 2019 was removed. And instead, compensation language is included that directs the governor to include in his next budget funding sufficient to offset any downward revision of the revenues for 2019, FY19, and FY20 that is sufficient to fund a 2% raise for state employees. And it's determined, if it's determined that a revenue reforecast isn't required, that funding would be used exclusively for a 2% raise for state employees, state-supported locals, and teachers. And there's also some language in Part 4 for a tobacco tax study that would direct the joint sub to evaluate tax preferences to study various technologies in tobacco harm reduction, as well as possible reforms to the taxation of tobacco-related products at the local level, with a study and report delivered to the Senate and House Finance Committees by November 1st. And Mr. Chairman, that completes the general government area, and I believe, unless there are questions, April will conclude with capital.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Questions? All right, we'll move on again. Thank you, Adam. And April?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will finish this up quickly in just a couple of slides. If you look at the top of the table on page 63, I didn't do totals in the interest of space there, but in Senate Bill 29, there were two actions. One where there were some additional revenue bonds for Project Ed VCU and some non-general fund cash for Old Dominion. They need a supplement for their football stadium, and they are going to do that without raising fees. Moving on to Senate Bill 30, You'll see what there was in the introduced budget and then the amendments. And I'll talk about the Senate Bill 30 amendments, but then you've got the new totals there at the right. Though I will mention that that wouldn't include the reduction in the 110 million in bonds that Jason talked about earlier in transit, because they don't get rolled up into the capital outlay section, but we did reduce that 110 million. First bullet, we retained what was in the introduced budget for maintenance reserve, 252 million over the biennium. There's 58.2 million for furnishings and equipment, and that's a small increase for one additional project than you saw in the introduced, and that's at the building with Virginia Tech in Roanoke, that research building. It's going to be coming online, so we picked that amount up. There's a pool of 282 million, and I'll wait to talk about that because I've got the details on the next page, but it does the replacement, renovation, or construction of 9 projects, and has that swap out that Jason talked about between the 20 million for, instead of the CSO, it does to the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund. There's 45.5 million in supplements to existing capital outlay pools, 33.8 million in the biennium for 6 standalone projects, which I've got summarized on a slide. And then I won't mention the transportation as Jason did that. And then you might remember there was 15 million for planning in the introduced budget. We've reduced that to 10 million, and it's for 3 additional projects, the majority of which is Central State Hospital. Moving on to the next page, page 64, this just summarizes the items that were in that big capital outlay pool that I mentioned. You'll note the changes are, there's a project with the seat of state government and swing space and repairs, the actual funding for the ABC warehouse administrative offices, and the second new facility at juvenile justice, which would be at Bon Air. Those next items are all things that were in the introduced except for that last one at DEQ, which is the swap out that we mentioned for the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund. Moving on to page 65. As I mentioned, these are the details for those standalone agency projects supported with bonds. I'll mention on the first one at behavioral health, that's a reduction in 600,000 for 2 items that we felt like were actual planning things that needed to be done in operating, so we reduced that project. The Jamestown Yorktown ship and the pier project there of 1.3 million, that's a new project. The next few items are the same. There's a new one under military affairs for the Virginia National Guard, their aviation support facility, and that is the last change to that pool, but it totals 53.8 million at that point. And Mr. Chairman, if there are no questions, that completes the staff's presentation.
Okay.
Though we'd be happy to take questions on the other areas as well.
Okay. All right, are there any questions from any member or any member that may be remaining in the audience? Hearing none, certainly thank the committee, the finance staff for this detailed presentation. We will be, as will be a part of a continuing order, to take the budget bill up on Thursday of this week. As always, staff will be available to address any of your concerns between now and then. Any further business to come before the committee this morning? Yes, Senator McDougall.
Funding is necessary and what is not. I think we owe our staff a round of applause for what they've put together. It's been really good.
Very good, yeah. I think, Senator McDougall, it was a healthy exercise. Obviously, you don't always want to be in the posture of reducing, but in addition to the 421 million that was obvious that we peeled out by not adopting Medicaid at this point, we went through an exercise of evaluating a lot of things that have been already in the budget, where we looked for ways of efficiencies, consolidations, and some budget language I think you'll find in there, embedded in the budget, will give us some direction for management of programs in the out years. So again, thank the staff for that, and the members, particularly the chairs of the committees that directed those activities. Sir Lucas, you guys? Mm-hmm. You know what? I'm glad I recognized you. This is not necessary. We all work together as a team. Thank you. We will have our regular meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And again, if there are additional questions for staff, I'm sure they'll be willing to address them on the 14th floor. Thank everybody. The meeting is adjourned.